in God, my Savior, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies His mighty. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies His word. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies His mighty. My spirit rejoices in God. My Savior, my soul magnifies His word. My spirit rejoices in God.
Well, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Happy to have everyone here this morning. If you were coming from my area of the woods, you ran through lots and lots of rain to get here, but we're happy to be here. We've been studying the topic of a life that matters, trying to make sure that the things that we do in life matter. And so last quarter, as Ahmand and I shared this class, we talked about life that matters mostly from the study of Psalms and Proverbs. So we would look at things that the psalmist would say, or things that Solomon or some of the other wise men that he had writing with him would say, or that he collected would say, and looked at a life that matters. Well, this quarter we're choosing to do it differently. We're going to take individual characters from the Bible and look at their example in terms of how they did things to make their lives matter. Okay, and I just heard something on my phone. I want to make sure it's off, because it has a tendency to suddenly tell me that I've used the phone so much at a particular time, and it'll go off right about 9:30. So I get interrupted one way or the other because I just turned it off. But anyway, today we're looking at Joseph. And we're going to look at Joseph and his mercy. Now, there's a lot of things to talk about Joseph, and so I'm going to hit on most of them, but then because we're talking about a life that matters, and he did a lot of things that mattered. So I'm going to just kind of cover most of those as we go through, but we're going to focus on the mercy, at least toward the end. So living a life that matters, in terms of review, we've talked about that living a life that matters fears God and keeps His commandments. And we came back to that several times as we went through the study. We talked about that living a life that matters chooses courage in the face of fear. Doesn't mean that you don't have any fear. It just means that you choose to be courageous despite the fact that something is scaring you, right? Living a life that matters is reverent. Reverent to God. Reverent to things that are holy. Reverent in worship. Reverent in your treatment of others. Living a life that matters finds joy in the gifts of God. Now, God's given us a great number of gifts. As a matter of fact, everything that we have, everything that we see, everything that we know, everything that we experience comes from God. Now you say, well, there's a lot of bad that comes in all that too in terms of our experience, but that's not what comes from God. The original gift comes from God. Living a life that matters trusts God. Living a life that matters is humble. Oops, I went too far. Living a life that matters seeks wisdom from God. Living a life that matters is expeditious and unashamed. Unashamed of what? For I am not ashamed of the gospel. I am not ashamed of the good news. I'm not ashamed of telling people, sharing people, and living my life in such a way that it says that Jesus is the reason that I'm here, and the things that, or the reason that I'm doing the things that I do. God's the reason that I'm here, right? But it's a life that's unashamed, but expeditious in the fact that we take the opportunities, we look for the opportunities, we seize the opportunities to share those in our words and our actions. Living a life that matters is generous and sacrificial. Oh, what happened? Did I do that? There we go. And continuing on, I missed a couple of these. Living a life that matters. I presume that this was one of the lessons, was full of patience. Living a life that matters, lives faithfully. That is, with Hannah, last week we talked about that living a life that matters is honest or responds to promises, keeps their vows, keeps their promises to their fullest. Okay, so we're going to talk about Joseph. Now, Joseph, I'll just be honest, Joseph is no doubt my favorite, absolute favorite Bible character. And hopefully you'll see why as I go through this lesson. But there's so many times in a life lesson I'll go back to the story of Joseph. Go back to the story of Joseph. And we'll do that today. This lesson is going to be a little different in my style because most of the time I have detailed written notes and I refer back to them. In this case, what you see up here are my notes. That's all I got. And the other thing that's different is I brought my Bible. That didn't come out right. The reason that's the case is most of the time I have the scriptures written on my notes, so I don't need to bring that in. But living a life that matters, talking about Joseph. Joseph covers from Genesis chapter 37 to Genesis chapter 50, with the exception of one chapter in the middle there, and I can't remember which one it is. It talks about Tamar and so forth, and Judah. But for the most part, that section is talking about Joseph. That is a lot of real estate. That's a lot of biblical real estate. If you consider how much time occurred in sometimes in one chapter in Genesis. But I don't know how many chapters that is. 12 chapters, if we subtract the one out. 12 chapters of Genesis is tied up in the life of one man. I'm thinking that might be important. Might be important. Okay? So let's look at that. And so we have a beautiful Technicolor dream coat there that you can order online. That's why it's there, but it's beautiful, isn't it? Joseph was the oldest son of a favorite wife. Yes, favorite wife, right? He's the oldest son of a favorite wife. Genesis chapter 30 talks a lot about how the arrangement of Laban made with with Jacob, his father, to have to be married to Rachel, the one that he loved, and so Jacob worked for 7 years. And lo and behold, there was a little switcheroo made by Laban, and he got the cancellation prize. He got Leah instead of Rachel. And the next morning he's like, "Oh, this didn't work out very good. You promised me this, and I got that." He goes, "Well, that's our custom, so that's what you're going to get." He says, "But you still want Rachel? Work for another 7 years, and you got her. But I'll tell you what, after a couple weeks, I don't know what the period of marriage was, but the agreement that they had then. But after a short period, you can go ahead and marry her, but you have to commit to 7 years work." And so he did. He didn't have to wait 14 years, but nonetheless, Leah was obviously not the favorite wife. She had a whole bunch of sons. Poor Rachel, she just wasn't having any kids at all. Eventually, she had Joseph, and then, once that happened, Joseph became the favorite child. And so Jacob bestowed great gifts upon his favorite child. Genesis chapter 37, verse 3 says, Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of the other sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. Now, I don't know if it was that beautiful or that many colors, but nonetheless, the point is, it was something expensive, and it was something specifically for this son that none of the other sons were given that great honor. Joseph was prone to dreams. Let's look at verse 6, going through verse 11. Joseph was prone to dreams. And he said to them, Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, there were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it, and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brothers said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and his words. He dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I, your mother, and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in his mind. Don't you remember that last statement? Kept the saying in his mind. We'll come back to that at the end if I have enough time. God gives him the ability to interpret dreams. Okay? And we'll see that more in other verses. So these are some things about Joseph. Okay? As you look at Joseph, these are some, if you will, a synopsis of Joseph. So, given the jealousy that his brothers encountered or were having, some bad things happened. So Joseph was tasked with reporting on his brothers. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 2, going back, Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers, and he was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. He was tasked with reporting on his brothers. How are your brothers doing? Well, you had 20 sheep, and now you have 18. It's because they had this opportunity and they sold the sheep or whatever. I don't know what the story was. Brothers planned to kill him. In Genesis chapter 37, verses 18 through 20, and they saw him from afar. Before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. And they said to one another, Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams. Okay, so they were going to take care of this dream problem. He's not going to bow down. They're not going to bow down before him. They're going to throw him in a pit. They're going to kill him and throw him in a pit. But instead, because of the intervention of Reuben, his brothers wound up selling him into slavery instead. Reuben didn't say sell him into slavery. Reuben said, why don't you just throw him into the pit? And then they saw this opportunity. Reuben came back and was like, I lost my brother, right? But so they sold him into slavery, verses 26 through 28. 26 through 28. And then Judah, keep in mind who this is, Judah said to his brother, What profit is it? You look at what he's looking at. If we kill our brother and conceal his blood, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites. Let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. Brothers, listen to him. Now, did Judah save him, or did Judah just find an opportunity to get money? Okay, good question. Father believes him dead, verse 32 through 35. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This is what we found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him." Joseph was without doubt torn to pieces. Okay. So now Joseph is sold into slavery, sold to the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites take him down to Egypt and sell him there. And Joseph becomes Potiphar's head slave. Verse 39. Chapter 39, verse 4. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him, and he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. And this is really, no kidding, the Reader's Digest version of this, but Potiphar's wife desired him sexually, verse 6 through 7. And so he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. Because of him, he had no concern about anything, any of the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house. He has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater than this house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are of his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against, not Potiphar, but God?" Joseph resists her pursuits. I think I read that, right? No, keep going. 8 through 12. Verse 10. And as he spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not listen to her and lie beside her or be with her. But one day, when he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men in the house were there in the house, she caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out of the house. So again, he resisted the pursuits. He resisted the temptation. He resisted sinning against God. And Potiphar's wife falsely accused him, verse 13 through 18. And as soon as she saw that he had left the garment in her hand and had fled out of the house, she called to the men of the household and said to them, "See, he has brought among us a Hebrew to laugh at us. He came in to be with me and lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I had lifted up my voice, he cried out and left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. And then she laid his garment by her until his master came home." So Joseph goes to prison. Verse 20. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison and placed the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in prison. And Joseph becomes head prisoner. So, this is kind of a pattern here, isn't it? You see Joseph, he starts off and he's kind of the head child in the family, the favorite child in the family. And then after that, he's sold to Egypt, comes to Potiphar's house and begins working there, and he becomes the head slave in Potiphar's house. And then, he was falsely accused, he's thrown in prison, and he becomes the head prisoner in the prison. It's a constant pattern. Joseph must have been an incredible individual who worked hard, didn't complain, and did what he was supposed to do in whatever circumstances he found himself. Okay. Joseph interprets dreams of fellow prisoners. This is a pretty lengthy reading. I won't read the reading. I'll kind of walk through it. So there were two prisoners with him that had dreams. The first of which was a former butler of the king, and he had he had been thrown into prison because the king, the Pharaoh, had had some concern about him. And he had this dream. He was dreaming that there was these bunch of grapes, and he squeezed them into the cup and handed them over to the king. And Joseph interpreted the dream and says, well, you're going to be restored to your former position. The Pharaoh's going to forgive you. You're going to be restored. Go back to work for him. Baker goes, oh, I like this dream. This guy's pretty good. So he asked him the same question. He says, look, I had a dream too. He says, there was these bread, and I had them on my head, and I'm carrying them, and all of a sudden the birds come and feed off the bread. And he says, what does this mean? He goes, well, fortunately what this means is that and I don't remember the number of days, but you're going to be killed. Birds will eat your flesh. And he's like, ah. So that's what happened. That's exactly what happened. And so what Joseph said to the cupbearer was what? Does anybody remember? Please do this. Remember me. Remember me. When you get out, look, I've done you this favor. Actually, God's done it through me, and he actually says that in a couple places. He says, just remember me. You know, I'm here in this prison. Remember. So the cupbearer forgets Joseph. Verse 23 of chapter 40. Yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. And Pharaoh has a haunting dream, and he needs an interpreter. Chapter 41, beginning in verse 1. And after 2 whole years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed on the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows. And Pharaoh awoke. He fell asleep and dreamed a second time, and behold, the 7 ears of grain, and plump and good, were growing in one stalk. And behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and blighted, to the east and the west. And the thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and it was a dream. So in all the morning his spirit was troubled, and he went and called for all his magicians of Egypt and all the wise men. And Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. And suddenly, cupbearer has an aha moment. And he remembers Joseph, and he tells the Pharaoh about Joseph, verse 9 through 13. And Joseph, giving credit to God, interprets the dream. And of course, what he tells him is that there's going to be 7 years of good harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. And if you're wise, Pharaoh, you will take the opportunity on the 7 years of good harvest, and then you'll have something in the bad harvest, right? And Pharaoh says, who can find such a person? And he goes, you know what? I think I'm going to choose you. So here comes Joseph again, and he's now the head again, right? So in each case, he's the head of where he goes. Joseph recommends a plan. Joseph becomes the head of this survival plan. Okay, now we're going to get into the meat of the mercy bit. So famine hits Joseph's family. Chapter 42, verses 1 through 5. And when Jacob learned that there was grain for sale in Egypt, he said to his sons, why do you look at one another? And he said, behold, I have heard that there is grain for sale in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us, that we may live and not die. So 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with his brothers, for he feared that harm might happen to him. Thus the sons of Israel came to buy among the others who came, for the famine in the land of Canaan. So famine hits Joseph's family. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but they don't recognize him. Verse 7 through 8. And Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, But he treated them like strangers and spoke roughly to them. Where do you come from, he said. And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. And Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. So he repeated the same concept. Joseph tests his brothers. Obviously, I'm not going to read chapter 42 through 44. But in that section, Joseph tests them. And there's several things that he did to test the brothers. And it's very interesting, a pretty detailed story about that. But in the end, Joseph reveals his identity. Chapter 45, verse 4, he reveals his identity. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near to him, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt." Now you must imagine a couple of things going through his brother's mind. This guy is the second most powerful person in Egypt. He has the power of life and death over us. And he just said, "I am your brother who you sold into slavery." What do you imagine is going through those men's mind?
We are doomed.
We are doomed. We are doomed, right? Other thing that's going through their minds probably is he was right with his dreams. He was right. We did bow before him. We bowed before him on a number of occasions now. He was right. What was Joseph's response? Obviously, his brothers feared him. Joseph extends mercy. I want to focus on this for a bit. Chapter 45, 4 through 15. Joseph said to his brothers, "Come near to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. Now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me before you to preserve your life." Wait a minute. Let's go back. What's happened to Joseph? What's happened? He's been threatened with death. He's been thrown into a pit. He's been betrayed by his brothers. He's been falsely accused. He's been thrown into prison and forgotten for how many years?
2 years.
God sent me before you. God sent me before you for this time. So what did it take for Joseph to have mercy? What was the required element in Joseph's life for him to have the kind of mercy that he had? What's that? I hear suffering, but I heard God. Love and forgiveness. You're missing a key element.
Believe that this was his purpose.
Belief, trust in God. He trusted God. Yeah, all these bad things happen, but he trusted God. No matter what happens, God's in control. God will make some good happen out of this. Now, there's some bad things. There's no doubt there were some bad things going on in Joseph's life. And at any moment in that life, he could have said, This is it. This is awful. Right? God has abandoned me. I'm here in prison. God has abandoned me. That's not what his attitude was. His attitude was, I'm going to use what God has given me to be a light or a help or to fulfill God's purposes. I'm going to let God use me. That was Joseph's attitude, and that allowed him to be merciful. Yes, ma'am?
Well, that's how we have to look at that scripture that says all things work together for good. We want to say all things work out for the good. No, it works together. It may be some bad stuff, but at the end, it works together for the good.
Right, and we got to keep in mind that I like that scripture because all things work together for good. For good. Who's good? God's good. And that's the mistake we make. All things work together for God's good, for his purposes. And those who are called according to his purpose are fine with that. We're good with that. We don't like it sometimes. It's uncomfortable sometimes. It may be life-threatening sometimes, but it is for God's good. You had a comment?
Yeah, we try to understand God's ways. We can't do it. God acts and moves in mysterious ways. You have to think that it was a mistake for Joseph to tell his father and his brothers those news.
Sure.
It was a prideful thing.
Okay, all right, so let me repeat this so everybody can hear it. Some on mic. Yeah. So he's making a comment that you have to understand or have to think that Joseph made a mistake. But he was 17, right? But he made a mistake. He's telling dreams to his brothers that looks like they're going to be subservient to him. So maybe he was a little bit prideful in his telling them this, right? And that's a mistake. That's certainly not a good thing to be doing, right? But he trusted God, and in the end, God brought him through it, right? Good comment.
You have to believe that God was compelling him.
Yeah.
Otherwise, this would not have worked.
Exactly. If he had not continued his faith in God, this would not work. Okay. Continuing on, going okay, 4 through 15. God sent me before you to preserve you for a remnant on earth, to keep alive for you many survivors, so that it is not you who sent me here, but God. God made me a father to Pharaoh, Lord of all of his house, and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Now, whether Joseph knows it or not, he's prophesying here, right? He said something about preserve you for a remnant on earth, to keep you alive, many survivors. For what purpose? God's purpose. It is well beyond the life of Joseph, on into the Jesus Christ, the promised one, right? They haven't even got to the kings yet. We haven't even got to the lineage of David yet. We haven't even got to that part of God's plan yet. But Joseph, whether he knew it or not, was saying, God's prepared you to be a remnant for his greater purpose so far down the road, I don't even know what you're talking about, Joseph. And Joseph's life is like this, right? And that's the other part of remembering that God's purpose is much larger than ours. We have a little slice. And you, because of your faith in God, your trust in God, are a good influence on a particular individual. And that particular individual, or maybe their child, or maybe their relative, responds to God in a positive way. You have died and gone on. 2 generations or 3 generations or 4 generations later, something great happens for the cause of God, and you never know it in this life. You got to keep in mind, it's not about your life. It's about God's purpose, right? So keep on doing God's purpose. Okay. I got into preaching there. All right. Joseph's family comes to live in Egypt. What are you doing? I want to make sure I get to the next part. Jacob dies. So Joseph's family comes to Egypt. He says, go bring your father bring them here. We're going to all live together. We're going to live up in Goshen because the people here are farmers and they don't like sheep herders. So you're going to live up there and down here. So that's God's plan to keep them separated. It didn't work as good as we would like for it to do because they still started following idols, but that's another story. They live up in Goshen, and eventually Jacob dies. And his brothers fear again. So after Jacob dies, let's look at chapter 50. Beginning at verse 15. And when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil that we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this commandment before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive their transgressions of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you." I'm going to stop right there for just a second. The sad thing, the very sad thing about forgiveness and mercy is those that don't have it don't get it. Those that don't have it don't get it. Joseph's brothers could not conceive of not retaliating. They couldn't conceive, they couldn't hold that concept in their head. So once their father died, they go, the only reason he's doing this is because of our father. He had a lot of respect for his father, and he didn't want to do anything to us while his father's living. And now he's dead, and so now they're going to take revenge. He's going to take revenge on us. And so they made up this story that, hey, our father said this. And now please forgive the transgressions of the servants of the God of your father. And Joseph wept. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. What created those tears? What was it that created those tears? Absolutely, sorrow. Joseph is torn up because he knows his brothers do not understand his mercy, do not understand his forgiveness, do not understand his love for them and his respect for God. He's torn up. Joseph reasserts his mercy, chapter 17. Verse 17 through 21. Joseph wept, verse 18, his brothers also came and fell before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear. Am I in the place of God? Do not fear. Am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me." He's recognizing you still have an evil heart. You had an evil heart. You meant evil against me. But God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide you and your little ones. Provide for you and your little ones. Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Mercy, mercy. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Matthew chapter 9, verse 13. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call, I called the righteous, but not the sinners. Came not to call the righteous, but sinners. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Matthew 18, verse 33. And should not you have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. We discussed this a few weeks ago when we were dealing with graciousness. God is merciful. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious. I'll show mercy to whom I will show mercy. For the Lord your God is gracious and merciful. But you are a God ready to forgive, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love. A God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness. The Lord is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. Gracious is the Lord, and righteous our God is merciful. The Lord is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. Return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. He relents over disaster. Then he prayed to the Lord God, O Lord, is this not what I said when I was yet in my own country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you were a gracious God and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and relenting from disaster. God is merciful. He desires us to be merciful. Joseph understood that, and Joseph chose mercy. Despite trials, tribulations, difficulties, challenges, he chose mercy. God's asking us to live a life that matters and choose mercy. There's some interesting things about Joseph, and I couldn't skip this lesson without talking about it, because this is why I love Joseph so much. If you go to the story of Joseph and you back it up, you'll see that God designed Joseph's life. Joseph was so in tune with God. God used Joseph's life to show us Jesus. Joseph and Jesus were both shepherds. Joseph was a shepherd of sheep. Jesus is a shepherd of men. And you can look at all of these scriptures. We don't have time. There's another lesson I'll bring someday in the future on this, but it's easy to see this. They were both beloved sons of their father. They both were hated, even though they were good. They were both completely misunderstood. Both cases, their parents kept these things in their heart. Remember Joseph? Remember I said, remember this? And Joseph's father kept these things in his heart, and Mary kept these things in her heart when he went to the temple. Everyone will bow before him, and indeed everyone will bow before Jesus. Amen. They were both stripped and thrown into a tomb. They were both sold by, look at that. Is it any wonder that that's the same name? One is a Romanized version of the same name. They were both sold by Judah, one for 20 and one for 30 pieces of silver. They both resisted temptation. They were both falsely accused. They both shared their punishment with two others. If you recall that Jesus, when he was crucified, there was one on his left and one on his right. And one was condemned and the other was restored. And then there's a lot on authority. They both started their mission when they were 30 years old. And both of them have an instance where, in Pharaoh's case, he says, do whatever he says. In Joseph's case, do whatever he says. And in Jesus' case, his mother says, do whatever he says, talking about turning the water to wine. In both cases, they were not recognized. If you recall, if no other incidents, the story where Jesus was on the road to Emmaus and he was not recognized. In both cases, no matter what, they chose to do the will of God. And finally, and the thing that I really want to get at, both of them offer grace and mercy.
Yes.
Both of them offer grace and mercy. And both of them are saddened when we don't understand it. How much God loves us, how much Jesus sacrificed for us, knowing that we would never do the same for him.
Right.
Knowing that we would never understand to the same level the grace and mercy that he has for us. Joseph did exactly the same thing. Joseph sacrificed his life to God and became a salvation for his brothers, salvation for Israel, and he became a symbol for us. He provided an opportunity for us to see God's weaving of history into the Bible and pointing us to Jesus Christ. Okay, I got through Joseph. Now you know why it's my favorite story of the Bible. I hope you enjoyed the class and got something out of it. And like I said, we'll come back to that later if the elders give me an opportunity to talk about something that I call typology. And there's a class on that. All right, that's it. Any questions, comments, thoughts? That was more of a me give it to you than we share back and forth today. Told you it was going to be a different lesson. All right, thank you very much.